Good afternoon, I'm Dennis Futoryan, and this is the 25th Hour, helping you remember everything that happened beyond the 24/7 news cycle. On today's show, we have the self-proclaimed activist elected official, Public Advocate Jumaane Williams. Born and raised in Brooklyn, New York to Grenadian parents, Williams graduated Brooklyn Tech High School and then Brooklyn College with a political science degree and master's in urban policy, becoming the assistant director for the Greater Flatbush Beacon School and then the executive director of New York State Tenants and Neighbors, getting his activist bona fides along the way. Jumaane won his first city council election in 2009, representing the 45th district encompassing Flatbush, Midwood, Marine Park, and other areas in Brooklyn for 8 years. There, he founded the Progressive Caucus, served as the deputy leader of the New York City Council, and chaired and co-chaired the council's Committee on Housing and Buildings and the Task Force to Combat Gun Violence, respectively. Among other major legislative accomplishments, Jumaane passed the Community Safety Act over Mayor Bloomberg's veto to create an NYPD Office of Inspector General, as well as the Fair Chance Act, which prohibited private employers from asking about a job applicant's criminal history until a job offer is made. Once Letitia James left her public advocate seat to become the state attorney general, Jumaane won a special election to fill the office in March of 2019, having lost in 2018 in the lieutenant governor's race against Kathy Hochul before becoming public advocate. Williams has announced an exploratory committee to run for governor of the state of New York, against who just so happens to be Kathy Hochul herself after the downfall of Andrew Cuomo. Public Advocate Jumaane Williams, thank you so much for coming up here, coming up to the 25th hour. It is a pleasure to have you here, sir.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure. Congrats on the podcast and awesome name.
Thank you so much. Full disclosure to our listeners, I actually used to intern at not the Public Advocate's office, but at Jumaane Williams' office when he was still a councilman. I was his one of his legislative interns. One of the most enlightening experiences of my life. So I just want to thank you for that time. And so I think we're going to just start off by asking you one of the most simple questions, and it could be a loaded one. What does a public advocate even do?
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's not simple. I think it's a question a lot of folks ask, and one of the things we wanted to make sure happens after my tenure is that people no longer have to ask because they'll know. But the 5 charter mandated things that the public advocate has to do is legislatively, they can introduce legislation to the city council. You can't vote, but you can introduce and try to get things passed. The second is an ombudsman. You're a go-between between people and the government. Third is a charter cop. You basically have make sure that the agencies are doing the jobs that the charter mandates they do. You get a vote on a pension board, and you get to appoint people to commissions and committees like CCRB or the City Planning Commission. The 6th one is not charter mandated, but I like to call it the bully pulpit. We get to just use the office's stature to raise issues and concerns.
And so what do you say to people who think that your office sounds redundant in the huge collection of offices that we have here in New York City?
I mean, I don't think it's redundant at all. I think different elected officials have different jobs to do. Some of them do have similarities, but the public advocate in particular, one job is to make sure to hold government accountable on behalf of the people. I think it's important that there is somebody that does that. I do think there's some things that can be done to strengthen the office's ability to do that.
And do you think that there should be more public advocates throughout the country? I think from my understanding, there's only one other public advocate in the U.S. I could be wrong, so correct me. But is that something you would like to see more of?
I believe there's 2 in the world, actually.
Oh, wow.
And I think one is in Maine. I think the main one is actually statewide. But when I speak to people in governments, across the country, once they hear what the function is, people are generally excited about it and figure out why we can't have one there. I think at a time like this, it shows how important it may have been to have someone like that on the state level. So there is a room for someone who's going to hold government accountable, but there are ways that we can use to make sure that the office is strengthened.
Now, before we start talking about your interest in certain statewide positions, do you think that the state in general should have a public advocate on that level as opposed to the city and on top of the city, I would say?
I would say that it's very worthwhile to have someone there. When I ran for lieutenant governor in 2018, and I actually said I wanted to turn the lieutenant governor's office into a public advocate's office for just that reason. And we've seen how important it might have been if there was someone there who would speak up on behalf of the people when things are going wrong, by the people who have the power to make these decisions. And the fact that we didn't have that person to do that, I think New York State suffered. And so if there, I think this is a great example of why a position like that would be helpful.
Gotcha. And so now that brings me to the elephant in New York State. You have announced that you have formed an exploratory committee to decide whether it is a good idea for you to run for governor. And I think the main question there is, why run for governor in the first place? For our listeners that are just finding out about this, what is your rationale that you could tell them?
Well, we first are planning to hopefully be reelected on November 2nd. Mm-hmm. The way the political calendar is laid out, sometimes it causes you to have to think about multiple things at the same time. And there is a statewide race that's going to happen in June that, I can't do anything about. The best thing I could do is let folks know that it's something I'm honestly considering, let voters know, so that no one can accuse me of not being honest. And I'm doing that because I believe we've used all the tools that I've had as a counsel and as a public advocate to push and prod executive leaders to do the right thing. And too often they're not. They're making decisions based on something else. Mm-hmm. And there's an opportunity now to actually be the person who has all the tools and actually do the things that I'm advocating for as the public advocate. And that is an enticing proposition to at least consider.
And so do you think that with Kathy Hochul now in the position, you don't believe that she would act as you would in the position, or do you feel like as if her priorities are different? Would you want to give her a chance? I mean, as of right now, it doesn't sound like it, but how do you feel about Kathy Hochul running?
Well, as of right now, we're not running against anyone. We're presenting a vision for what we think the governor and Albany should look like, and we're trying to see if that vision will be receptive. I would say that the governor was the lieutenant governor when I ran, and so we have put forth what we thought was a vision for the lieutenant governor's office then, and that how different it might have been had someone like me won, that would have had the courage to speak up when the governor was making very bad decisions on behalf of the people of the state. And we didn't have that. And I think, I know New Yorkers suffered because of that. And so many of the issues that I had in 2018, they haven't gone away. And I have to just remind folks, it's not about any one or two people. It's about an infrastructure that's been built for a very long time that is hard to do away with if you just try to take away one person. So we have to renew and recover New York State. But we can't do that by just removing one or two people. And so we need to have somebody on top who has spent their career actually trying to figure out and presenting ways and battling to create entire infrastructures and doing battle successfully. I think it's better to do that with someone like that than with someone who actually has fed into the infrastructure.
Now, you mentioned wanting to implement your vision that you've, ran on as lieutenant governor for lieutenant governor rather, and bringing New York back. And you're talking about the infrastructure necessary in order to serve the people of New York. Can you explain a little bit more what that infrastructure looks like? What is the end result that you're looking for if, let's say, you become governor, if you announce a run? Or in general, what is your vision looking for?
Well, when I traveled across the state in 2018, one, I fell in love with the state. It's amazing. Two, I realized while there are some geographical differences, some cultural and local differences in government and how people live day to day, generally speaking, the overarching themes of what people are dealing with were the same. From certain areas, gun violence, public safety, affordable housing, tenants and owners, trying to get better education for your kids, access to public transportation or making sure that the roads are working so you don't get a bent rim, trying to get some good food, trying to get health care and mental health services. Those things, were the same in many municipalities. And everybody was looking to Albany why they're not helping. And so we tried our best, as we always do, to try to unite the powers of those cities. But I found that people were making decisions about what's best based on what's best for them in their career. And you have people making decisions on what's best for their egos, and using the power to basically bully folks around and create a toxic environment that is not just egregious about what we saw that finally had the governor resign, but it's egregious in how you govern and make decisions. That infrastructure has been there, by the way. It wasn't just Cuomo. I guess he perfected it. He thrived in it, but it's been there for a while. Mm-hmm. And we need to break that down so that people are doing what's right for the state on those issues, and not necessarily what's good for the ego, and not necessarily what's in response to who can give you the biggest check. And it's important to put in place people who are proven to do that successfully.
Do you think with Cuomo gone, it'll be easy to start breaking down that culture in Albany, or are there still going to be people around that have been so used to things that it's going to take a little bit more than one governor resigning, in your opinion?
It's definitely going to take more than one governor resigning. I believe it was a political article that talked about how hard it is for muscle memory to just go away. Mm-hmm. And it's that much harder if you have someone there who's come up, fed into, and benefited from that infrastructure than if you have somebody who's always pushed back against it consistently.
You don't think it's enough for, let's say, Hochul to, switch out Cuomo's appointees and friends at the top of agency positions?
Well, again, we're not doing it specifically against any one person. So I want to keep saying that. Mm-hmm. I do think it's important to have people in place that to remove some of those folks. So I think that's good. But there's much more than that. Mm-hmm. It runs a lot deeper into how things operate in Albany. And having someone at the top that wants to not change it on a very superficial level, but actually will go in there and really change it, is important. And there's the vision that we're putting forth. I don't think too many folks have the credibility than we do.
Now, I know that people have already been asking you your thoughts about a potential run by State Attorney General Letitia James. Probably have asked you about Mayor DeBlasio thinking about running for governor. So, let's take them one at a time. How would you, or how have you begun to think about a possible contrast with Letitia James if you guys both see yourselves in a run for governor?
Well, Attorney General and I have a very good relationship, and we serve together on the council. I definitely want to maintain that and will maintain that. She's also done a really good job as Attorney General. So that's one side of it. The second is, as I mentioned, and that includes the Attorney General and the mayor, we are not yet running against anyone. We're really focused on putting this vision forward. To my knowledge, she hasn't said that she's publicly interested, so there's nothing to consider. Even if there was, because she said she was, again, because we're not running against anyone, the entrance of or the exit of anyone is not part of our decision-making process.
And now let's take Mayor DeBlasio, outgoing Mayor DeBlasio. How, even if you're not going to contrast yourself with the mayor, because as you said, you guys aren't running, right? So, but what are your at least thoughts on the idea that Mayor DeBlasio, with his popularity in the city, about him thinking about making a run for governor, especially in light of recent accusations that he's misused public funds in connection to his security detail for his presidential run?
What I would say is my job as public advocate has been either to work with the mayor when I believe things were going in the right direction, decisions he was making in the right direction, and to hold him accountable when I think there were wrong decisions being made. I've done both. So besides from the governor run, I just want to make sure we're clear, I'm very much on the record of, unfortunately, there's been probably more times that I've had to push back on things that were going wrong. And that's disappointing. And I've been clear about that, based especially where he started in the campaign. In terms of running for governor, everyone has a right to run for governor if they meet the qualifications, and he does. And again, we're not running against anyone at this moment in time. I do think the vision that we're putting forward, we have the unique ability to do so, and that's one of the things we're going to be talking to folks as we travel the state.
I look forward to hearing about that, and maybe one day I'll catch you and see what you say about things as you're potentially running at that point. But let's see. I do respect that you're still in an early stage and you're crafting your vision. And so I have one more thing to ask about a potential gubernatorial run, or at least things happening around that subject. You have recently expressed your displeasure with the chair of the state Democratic Party, Jay Jacobs, endorsing Kathy Hochul, I would say right away, while leaving the Buffalo mayoral race alone, for one thing. For listeners who aren't aware, India Walton beat the incumbent mayor of Buffalo, Byron Brown, in the Democratic primary, but that has not stopped Byron Brown. So why do you think he's made his endorsement in the governor's race? And if you want, explain a little bit about how you feel about Mr. Jacobs staying quiet about Buffalo.
So we were speaking about the infrastructure that is still in place. We mentioned that we were having an exploratory committee, and why. And then about a week after, a perfect example came up with Jay Jacobs endorsing Kathy Hochul. We're not surprised. It doesn't, affect us in any real way. But what it does is, again, highlight the infrastructure and the desire for Albany to work the way it always has. And Jay Jacobs, as the party chair, the job is really about being impartial in primaries and supporting and lifting up Democratic nominees. And to see that he's so concerned about incumbency protection and preventing a primary in June, that he would come out so early, and the hypocrisy of then not supporting someone like India Walton, Black woman, who really did it the difficult way, and surprisingly went into the primary and beat an incumbent. So she is now the actual Democratic nominee for the general election, running against someone who is literally backed by the Republicans, and he won't get involved. Just says a lot about the issues we're raising and why we think our vision is necessary at this moment in time.
I think one of the things that Jacob said is that he fears that a massive swing to the left would, in fact, make it swing the other direction and make Republicans win stateside. I'm paraphrasing. So what do you think about him saying that? Do you think that he's, making a veiled allusion to someone like you? Or, how do you feel about him saying that sort of thing? Is there really a danger of New York
the Democratic Party always talks about these things, and then they'll talk about Democratic unity. But they talk about that as long as you're supporting the candidate that they want, generally the more establishment candidate, and generally the candidate who plays by the rules that keep the establishment in power, which unfortunately prevents the things from being addressed that I spoke about earlier, whether it's housing, whether it's work, and things of that nature. So it just doesn't bear out. So when you look at nationally, primaries that they were supposed to stay out of and they didn't, it wasn't incumbents that were there. It was just people who were running, but they didn't like the people who, there were certain people they liked and certain people they didn't. So they pushed that. Here, I just came off a race with about 16 people in it for Public Advocate. I don't think it divided up much of anything. I think people made a decision. And we hear this all the time. Primaries are exactly for this purpose, for people to hear different points of view, and then you go on into a general. But this is just an excuse that has never really borne out. It's just used as a scare tactic to support the person the establishment part of the party wants you to support.
Now, just to start switching gears, one of the things I remember you doing from my time as one of your legislative interns in your city council office is specifically asking for Republicans or even those without a label, they're just ideological opponents to your ideas, be transferred to you directly so that you can talk to them and have an exchange of ideas. Do you still do that now as public advocate?
Well, I don't have as much time to as I would like to. I do sometimes try to do that on social media, and if it's actual people who want to exchange ideas, I try to have a quick conversation. But very often we're in a time and space now that's different, that people actually don't want to have the exchange of ideas. They just want to hear the echo chamber and just get to a point where it's actually not productive at all. So that's unfortunate. But I do still very much try to make sure that when I'm making a decision that I've heard all sides of the decision and I understand the arguments of all sides, because it's important to understand where people are coming from, why they're having a certain position. And I need to be able to defend my position. And so it's always been important to me to understand the opposition of a policy position or a decision, because then I can be better at why I'm supporting it. And if I can't do that, I probably need to change where I am on that particular decision.
Yeah, and one can expect that it's a lot harder these days to have those kinds of conversations that are well balanced. Especially in our area of partisanship, you would think that with Trump gone, things would settle down a little bit, but it seems as if things have solidified to such an extent to, the other side of the aisle that it makes it incredibly, incredibly difficult. And, but not to, I don't want to harp on the negative. I actually want to ask you if you remember the last good political conversation that you had with somebody, could have been from the public or on social media. Do you remember the last time you had that kind of conversation?
Yeah, I was actually at a thought leaders discussion yesterday, where they try to bring some folks together that don't always see eye to eye and around the table. So that was pretty good to kind of get folks at one space to have a discussion. It's always important, especially when people are trying to make decisions on what they think people are saying based on sound bites and media. And I love those. I actually prefer to speak to people who disagree with me than the people who agree with me. One, I need to make sure I can defend my position. Two, you can always learn something. And three, most folks that I get to have a longer conversation with tend to agree with most of what I'm saying. And I believe that to be true. What happens is, especially during election time, people don't want those long conversations. They want the soundbite that riles up and gives red meat and prevents those conversations from happening. And unfortunately, that red meat usually feeds people's fears and causes folks to make some decisions that just aren't helpful for anyone.
So are you going to appear on Tucker Carlson anytime soon again?
I used to like going on Tucker, but Tucker has completely gone to a space that's just not healthy. It used to be a space, even if we disagreed, we could have some kind of discussion. That's not what he's about anymore. And it's sad. I think at some point you wake up and see how much was squandered by what we're saying. So I don't think so.
Do you think that it's impenetrable now with Trump voters, or is it just, politics for Republican politicians trying to stay in office, or is it just that substantive now? I mean, are they reachable at this point?
It's always been, you always have people who actually believe a lot of the bigoted and oppressive stuff that folks are saying. And then you have people who don't, and those are, sometimes I'm more angry at those folks, but incumbency protection is what drives politics on both sides of the aisle. And it's extremely damaging to this country. The two-party system is extremely damaging to this country. And incumbency protection, if I have to get elected regardless, is very damaging to this country. There is a lot of sheeple Republican leaders who know very well that they're spouting lies and they're spouting harmful things, and they're defending things that are indefensible. But if they don't do it, they may not get reelected. And that's the number one thing.
And that's the thing. It feels like we are stuck in this two-party system in this cycle. Andrew Yang recently started his own third party. Do you think his forward party has any chance?
I feel like there's enough third party options that if a lot of folks who don't like the two-party system, we get on board with one of them, it might be a little better than just going out and creating your own again.
And so going on the off-ramp of our conversation now, I'll let you go soon. I just wanted to ask how you feel the city's doing now with COVID, because I can imagine that plenty of people are ready for this thing to be over, for this pandemic to be over. As the public advocate, as part of your job overseeing how the city's responding to the pandemic, how do you feel about it now at this current moment, how we're doing?
I mean, we're still on shaky ground. We're not out of it yet. Thankfully, the worst of what we thought could have happened based on some bad decisions hasn't. That means that doesn't mean it won't. And people, I think, are still needlessly dying. So we do have to get our vaccinations up. There should be an indoor mask mandate in right now, which is unfortunate. And we shouldn't have been opening up as quickly as we are. And one thing that I think is missing is, making sure that we're not returning to normal, that we're putting in infrastructures and changes to how we view things, so that when we go to full blast reopen, it's not the same people who benefit all the time, but that more New Yorkers in more parts of the city benefit. Got
it. And hopefully we climb out of this soon. We continue to still lose people every day. So if you haven't gotten your vaccines, guys, go and get them. There's no time to waste. Now, aside from the pandemic, what do you feel is the most immediate problem our city has to solve to become more prosperous? Renewing and recovering out of the pandemic is big. After that, public safety is huge. And we have an opportunity to do it right. Not the way we did it 30, 40 years ago when everybody apologized 30 years later. But we have an opportunity to get it right now. And that's an important discussion. And having courageous leaders there to lead people through this discussion is extremely important. Understanding that people need to be safe and they actually need to feel safe. Sometimes even when people feel safe, and when people, sometimes when people actually are safe but don't feel safe, it might be worse. And it's important to have that discussion, understanding those things and understanding what it takes and what public safety is actually about. Thank you so much, Public Advocate Jumaane Williams. I want to thank you again for spending some time with us here at the 25th hour. Your presence is super, super appreciated. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me, and congratulations. It's good to talk to you again. And that's it for this week's show of the 25th hour, helping you stay on top of the 24/7 news cycle. Don't forget to rate us on Apple Podcasts, share us with your friends, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can email your tips and suggestions at the 25th hour news at gmail.com and become a patron today for as low as $2 a month to support the show at patreon.com/the 25th hour news. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.